Hey everyone, George here. And in case you haven't noticed by watching this channel or my videos, I really like horror movies. I really enjoy horror movies. And for good reason. There's a lot of amazing horror films out there. You have films like The Exorcist, Poltergeist, Scream, Carrie, the Nightmare on Elm Street films, the Friday the 13th films, Halloween films. There's just so many amazing movies out there that the general public knows about. You can walk into a store, a Walmart or something, and randomly talk to a person and mention one of those movies I said, and they know, they may not have seen the movie, but they know the character, they know what the character looks like, they get an idea or the gist of what those films are about. The horror genre is very robust. You have a wide net of films that constitute as a horror film. You have movies like Event Horizon, and you also, inside the same genre, you have movies like The Strangers. So it's a very large and robust movie genre. And, you know, there's a lot of movies that you've heard of, and the average person who doesn't even like horror movies have heard of. I feel like there are movies in this genre that are just as good, if not better, than some of these mainstream films or these widely popular films. And so I compiled a list. I feel like these movies deserve a look. At least some more attention, at least one viewing from you or the people you know in your life. So I compiled a list of films that I consider the top 10 most underrated horror films of all time. Okay. Coming in at number 10 in our list is the film from 1986, The Hitcher, directed by Robert Harmon. The film stars C. Thomas Howell, Rutger Hauer, and Jennifer Jason Leigh. I'd like to point out that Rutger Hauer did a phenomenal job playing the antagonist in this film. He almost is like an action movie villain. He's just this unstoppable force, like the Terminator, or just some other 80s action movie villain where you can run him over, hit him, shoot him, and he will still get up and come after you. What makes this movie so amazing is they take this sort of campy, pulpy storyline of a road trip gone wrong where the main character picks up a hitchhiker that ends up being a psychopath. He tries to kill him and he escapes. And what you get for the next hour and a half or so is a masterpiece, a wonderful cat and mouse action, horror, thriller masterpiece. Everyone involved in this movie turned this super campy, pulpy concept into this really fantastic horror thriller action film. Also, another thing that is really amazing about this movie is the cinematography. The movie looks gorgeous. The cinematography is fantastic. The cinematographer of this film is actually an Academy Award-winning cinematographer. He won an Academy Award for his cinematography in The English Patient. And he did some other noteworthy movies, such as Mad Max: Fury Road, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Rain Man, and the Dead Poets Society. You know, when you see a list like that and you see sort of the accomplishments this man has done, it's no surprise that The Hitcher looks beautiful. Now, this movie is, not many people really know about it. There was a sequel back in 2003, which I never saw, and there was also a remake in 2007. But the original 1986 movie, The Hitcher, is absolutely a masterpiece. It really is. In fact, it was so good that Christopher Nolan, the director who made Memento, Oppenheimer, Interstellar, Inception, The Dark Knight, he actually said that this was one of his favorite movies growing up. And honestly, if it's good enough for Christopher Nolan, I think it's good enough for you to watch. You should absolutely check it out. Coming in at number 9 in this list is Lord of Illusions, written and directed by Clive Barker. The film stars Scott Bakula, Kevin J. O'Connor, Famke Jensen, and Daniel Von Borgen. Basically, the synopsis of this film is Scott Bakula plays a private detective from New York that travels to LA to work on an insurance fraud case. This case pulls him into a plot that's set in the world of magicians and illusionists, where a cult is trying to resurrect their dead leader. There's nothing really else to say. It's a really good movie. I actually first saw this movie in junior high. I was probably too young to watch this. I saw the NC-17 version. I rented it from Blockbuster, and it wasn't the rated R version. It was the NC-17 version, which had more gore in it. And I saw both versions. I've seen the rated R version, and I've seen the NC-17 version. And if you can watch the NC-17 version, it's a little bit longer. There's a bit more context to the story. Things make sense a little better. I feel like the R version cuts out a chunk, and it kind of like jumps around too much. But the NC-17 version really fleshes things out, and you won't be surprised of characters being in different locations all of a sudden. It'll make sense that they're there or at somewhere else. So if you have the option, I recommend you watch the NC-17 version. The other thing to keep in mind is that this movie feels like it's a tale of two films. On one side, you have this really cool, dark horror film, supernatural fantasy horror movie, and then the next scene will feel like this really cheesy 90s made-for-TV detective story. But that's part of its charm. It's you know, it is what it is. It's a 90s detective story that has some really good supernatural horror, fantasy horror elements to it, and the visual effects are actually pretty good. There's some bad CG in this movie, but you know, it's the 90s. What do you expect? I mean, not everything can look as good as Jurassic Park back in the 90s. Coming in at number 8 on the list is 1971's Let's Scare Jessica to Death, directed by John D. Hancock. The film stars Zara Lamport. Basically, the synopsis of this film is, a woman named Jessica, who has recovered from a nervous breakdown, moves to a country house with her husband and friend. There's a woman squatting there, which they allow to stay. Strange things start happening, and Jessica starts questioning her sanity. Now, I don't want to spoil anything else with this movie. In fact, the less you know going into it, the better your experience will be. I saw this movie not having any idea what this movie was about, and I just sat down and was like, okay, it's just gonna be this cheesy 70s movie. The title's called Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I'm like, okay, let's watch this. And I was like, whoa. This movie is better than it should be for a film that has a title like Let's Scare Jessica to Death. This film also has some very simplistic and unsettling imagery. They did things in this horror movie in terms of the imagery that I did not see done until I would say 30 years later, in the late 90s, early 2000s, did I notice horror films starting to do this. So I would make the case, I may be wrong, but I would make the case that this movie was ahead of its time because it did certain things with the imagery, and it's very simple imagery. It's not like super crazy, the imagery, but it did things that were just downright creepy and unsettling. It made me feel really uncomfortable when I was watching the film. Not only that, not going to ruin anything, but there's a monologue at the very end of the movie that is just a very memorable monologue that a lot of people who've seen this movie that's one of the first things they'll mention about that film. And again, it goes back to the writing in this movie. Everything about this movie is better than you'd expect it to be for a movie that has the title, Let's Scare Jessica to Death. So please, by all means, go right now and watch it. Coming in at number 7 on the list is 1974's Deathdream, directed by Bob Clark. Yes, that's right, Bob Clark directed this movie. The director of Black Christmas, the director of Christmas Story, and the director of Porky's directed this movie, Deathdream. And I gotta say, this is probably the saddest horror movie I have ever seen. This movie will depress you. It will make you feel sad. It is actually an anti-war, or more specifically, an anti-Vietnam War film. The whole movie is an allegory for PTSD. It's actually Tom Savini's first film that he ever did makeup for. So it has some good visual effects, some really cool makeup, but it is a very dark, very sad movie, and at times very creepy. And oh, sorry, I haven't even gotten to the synopsis yet of this film because this movie excites me so much. The synopsis of this movie is, a young man dies in Vietnam, but comes back to life. It's quite vague how he does so, but anyway, he returns home and wreaks havoc on his small town. Now, I'm trying not to reveal too much about this movie because this movie is really good. It's really sad, really depressing. I think it is actually an important horror film to watch. The whole movie is an allegory for PTSD. It even brings up subject matter that family members of people who have PTSD will be encountering. That each family member interprets, this main character, Andy, interprets his behavior differently. Obviously, it's dangerous and people are concerned, but there's a lot of ignoring the red flags, a lot of just assuming he's okay. There's a lot of anger and frustration, and there's fear and sadness. This movie is very, very sad. It is not a happy horror movie. If you want to watch a fun horror film, don't watch this movie. But by all means, don't make that statement make you not watch this movie, because this movie is really good. It is absolutely fantastic. Great score, great atmosphere, great practical effects, and just a really deep cutting message at the core of this film. So I recommend you watch this movie right now. Coming in at number 6 on this list is 1994's In the Mouth of Madness, directed by John Carpenter. The film stars Sam Neill. Also playing a small part in this movie is Charlton Heston. Yeah, damn dirty apes. You've gone and done it. I do feel like this film is only now starting to get the recognition it deserves. I feel like there's a lot more attention on it than there was years ago, but even still, it's not like a widely popular film. You know, you have other John Carpenter films that are way more popular. Obviously, Halloween, The Thing. But I do think In the Mouth of Madness deserves the same amount of attention as those other films. The synopsis of the film is, Sam Neill plays an insurance investigator who is hired by a publishing company to find Sutter Kane, a best-selling horror author, whose manuscript for his latest novel is due, but Sutter Kane has gone missing. So, Sam Neill, accompanied by Sutter Kane's book editor, travel up to New England looking for the town he is believed to reside in. When they arrive in town, the town itself resembles locations and people from Sutter Kane's novels, and some wonderful Lovecraftian horror adventure ensues. Now, the concept of a person being hired to go out into uncharted territory to find a person or object and bring them back is not a new one. You have stories like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, or Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, which was inspired by Heart of Darkness. You also have Dan Simmons' first novel, Song of Kali, which has a similar premise of a person going into uncharted territory to find a person and bring them and an object back. It's not an original concept, but this concept allows for some high-stakes adventure to take place. And that's what happens in this movie. This movie is better than you would think it would be. For a movie that not many people have heard of, this movie is fantastic. It was really hard for me not to put this higher on the list, because this movie is just so good. Great creature effects, great story. Sam Neill delivers a wonderful performance. I recommend that you go and watch this movie today. Coming in at number 5 on our list is 2005's Japanese found footage horror film Noroi, The Curse. The film is directed by Koji Shiraishi. Now, this is the same director who did Sadeko vs. Kayoko, which I actually really enjoyed. And this movie, Noroi, it's a crazy one. This film not only will make you laugh, it will terrify you. It's one of those movies that it's shocking how much this movie made me smile, made me laugh, and made me absolutely scared. The synopsis of this movie is, a television personality who investigates the paranormal goes to a home after neighbors complain of hearing unexplained sounds coming from that house. What starts off as a fun and intriguing and at times very funny documentary eventually turns into a multi-layered story that is actually one of the scariest movies I have ever seen. In fact, the less you know about this film going into it, the better it is. Just turn this video off right now and watch it. I don't want you to know any more about the movie. Do not Google this movie. Do not look up any info about it. If you want to Google it, only Google where you can watch this movie, because going into this not knowing a lot about it is part of the fun of this film. Coming in at number 4 on this list is 1980's absolutely bizarre film, Altered States, directed by Ken Russell. Man, there is so much to unpack about this film. I don't know where to begin. Let's do this. Let me talk about Ken Russell himself. He directed The Devils, he directed Tommy, and he also directed Lair of the White Worm. So Ken Russell doesn't really direct very straightforward films. His films are rather odd. And to say that Altered States is an odd film is a bit of an understatement. You're doing a disservice to the film by just saying it's an odd film. It is something so much more than an odd film. It is stranger than odd, but it is absolutely wonderful. The film stars William Hurt, Blair Brown, Bob Balaban, and Drew Barrymore's in this film as well. She's a little kid in this film. It's her first appearance in a film, I believe. Now, I don't want to tell you too much about this movie, but the synopsis of this movie is: a respected scientist played by William Hurt experiments on himself with drugs and an isolation tank in order to explore and study different states of consciousness. And as he does so, you are treated to an absolutely bizarre, trippy, fun, oddball adventure that is part sci-fi, part horror, and part something else. I don't know what else to say about this movie other than that you need to watch it. It has great atmosphere, great visual effects, absolutely insane writing and insane concepts, but just watch it. You will not regret watching this movie. Coming in at number 3 on this list is 1974's musical horror film, The Phantom of the Paradise. This film is directed by Brian De Palma, the director of Scarface, Carrie, Sisters, The Untouchables, Mission Impossible, and one of my personal favorite films, Blowout. The film stars Paul Williams, William Finley, and Jessica Harper. Now, the fact that the main villain in this movie is the man who wrote the song Rainbow Connection for the Muppet movie, sung by Kermit the Frog, is absolutely amazing. And he plays this really insane villain in this movie. It's actually very funny because Paul Williams he's not really a villainous type, but he pulls it off in this movie in a very, very fun way. Also, Jessica Harper stars in this movie, the main character from Suspiria. This movie is great. It has a great cast, great music, really good music. And I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what the synopsis of this movie is about. This film is a fun 70s disco-rama version of Phantom of the Opera. There's not much more to say about this movie other than that I prefer this film and soundtrack over the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Everyone did a fantastic job in this movie. Paul Williams did a great job. William Finley did an amazing job playing the Phantom. Jessica Harper did a great job. The music's great. All the supporting actors are amazing. Brian De Palma did a fantastic job directing this movie. The aesthetic, the disco aesthetic in this film is so good. There's just so much to like about this movie. It's just a fun musical horror movie that you may have never saw, and your neighbor never saw it, or your coworker never saw it. I recommend that you watch this movie tonight. I know I'm giving you a lot of movies to watch tonight, but, make some time. Make some time and watch this movie. You will not regret it. Okay, coming in at number 2 on the list is 1989's Santa Sangre, directed by Alejandro Jodorowsky. I love this movie. I absolutely love this movie. In fact, I almost made this number one on the list. It was number one on this list up until maybe an hour ago. And the reason why is because it's an Alejandro Jodorowsky film, meaning that it's not for everyone. I don't know if you've ever seen a film from him. It gets pretty out there. It's an absolutely bizarre but lovable movie. It's deep, and it really cuts deep. No pun intended, because there's a lot of slasher elements in this movie. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me read you the synopsis of this film. The film follows a man who grew up in a circus. Something happens to him when he was a child, which greatly traumatizes him, which then causes him to act out. And this description's very vague. I really don't want to reveal too much about this movie. I think you should go into this movie just knowing a little bit about it, but not too much. Just understand that you're going to see an unconventional horror movie. Not only is this horror movie unconventional, it is a masterpiece. The cinematography is amazing, the writing's amazing, the movie's bizarre, so the writing's going to be a little crazy, but it's great. The acting's amazing. Two of Alejandro Jodorowsky's sons are in the movie. Also, the film stars Bianco Guerrera and Guy Stockwell. But I highly recommend you watch this movie. This movie often gets overlooked, and a lot of people don't even know this movie exists. But it is such a good movie, like a legitimately good film. It's dark, it's weird, it's unsettling, at times it's funny. Just watch it, just watch it. Watch it and tell me what you think in the comments below, because I love this movie. I almost put this as number one. I just don't think it will be as widely loved as my number one movie that I put in that spot right now. But it's a very good movie. You should absolutely watch Santa Sangre. And coming in at number one on this list is the 1972 British horror film Tales from the Crypt. Yes, Tales from the Crypt, not the HBO Crypt Keeper one. You do have a Crypt Keeper in this one, but it's a man wearing a cloak. He does a great job. I think this movie needs to be known more. Everyone here, at least in the US, knows the really fun HBO series Tales from the Crypt with the Crypt Keeper. Because it's there's reason why it's well known and popular. Because it's great. It was great. It was a great series. I watched it when I was a kid, probably when I was too young to watch it, but I'd seen episodes. And it was great. But when I was a kid, I also saw this movie, the 1972 British film. In fact, the first adaptation of Tales from the Crypt. And it is so darn good. This film is directed by Freddie Francis. He actually directed a bunch of Hammer movies as well. And he is a two-time Academy Award-winning cinematographer. He won Academy Awards for his work on Sons and Lovers and Glory. He also did cinematography for David Lynch. He did the cinematography for The Elephant Man, Dune, and The Straight Story. Also, he was the cinematographer for Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear. The synopsis of this movie is: 5 strangers get lost in a crypt, and they come across a crypt keeper that tells them each a story of how they are going to die. So, in case you haven't noticed, this movie is a horror anthology film. So that's 5 stories in total. And each one is great. Some are stronger than others, but they're all quite good, very entertaining. The special effects, for the most part, is really good. There's some weird effects, especially toward the end of this movie, but the special effects in this movie are great. Sure to go back to when I was talking about Santa Sangre earlier and how I didn't put in number one. And I put this one in number one because I feel like this would be more widely accepted, more embraced by the average person. It's a great movie from beginning to end. This movie is a delight. It really is a delight. You can sit down. It's not scary. It's just a good horror movie, like a good traditional anthology horror film. You're going to have some traditional scares in it. And it can be cheesy because it's like early 70s, but it's great. It's a very good horror movie. So, number one on my list is 1972's Tales from the Crypt. Go and watch that right now. You will not regret it. So there you go. That is, in my opinion, the top 10 most underrated horror films of all time. Now, this was a really, really hard list to make. When I was making this list originally, I had 40 films. I had actually over 40 films on this list. And I had to whittle it down to just 10 movies. And it was hard. It was really hard. And you may not agree with this list. And you may think that there are movies that are not on this list that should be on this list, and movies that are on this list that shouldn't be on the list. And I would love it if you comment in the comments below and let me know your opinion and like what you think is the most underrated horror film, the best underrated horror film of all time.